Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming, and we are back. Yes, we are back already with yet another media intersection video, Curseborne and the works of Mike Flanagan. Now, this is one that's been anticipated for a while. I know a lot of us creators at Onyx Path Publishing have been talking fairly frequently, incessantly you might say, about how Mike Flanagan has influenced the direction of the Curseborne RPG. His work has really got into the heads of myself and my colleague Dixie Cochran in particular, although all of us on the Curseborne team have spoken about Mike Flanagan's works and how I guess eerily similar some of the ideas presented in works like The Fall of the House of Usher are to what we were thinking of for Curseborne, and how taking inspiration from a show like The Fall of the House of Usher has resulted in us refining the message for, let's say, the Ayres family in Curseborne, which we'll get back to. If you're unfamiliar with the name of Mike Flanagan, I would take you back to my first of these media intersection videos where I was speaking about the literature of Stephen King and how that influences my work on Curseborne in particular. You see, Mike Flanagan has now scored several collaborations with Stephen King in the form of Gerald's Game, which is a wonderful, creepy story that was adapted perfectly for the theatre. The movie theatre is just a steadily encroaching sense of dread in that movie that is just perfect. Dr. Sleep. Now, Dr. Sleep is a movie which most of you are probably going to know is a sequel to The Shining. The novel is a sequel to The Shining as well, and is something that has been, appropriate enough for a novel called Dr. Sleep, slept on. I think there's so much dedication, devotion to the Stanley Kubrick movie that people immediately wrote off the idea of a sequel as being somehow cheap or cashing in. And I would actually hold Dr. Sleep up there as among the best, not only horror novels, but horror movies of the last decade. The fact is that I think the antagonists in Dr. Sleep, the True Knot, a cult of, well, they devour people's shinings and with it their life force, are almost direct influences on the Verari family in Curseborne. I mean, when I was writing bits and pieces for the Verari, because originally we didn't have soul eaters. I mean, it wasn't going to be something as clear cut as that, but I wanted to put something that was somewhere between True Knot, somewhere close to Shang Tsung, which I know is a bit of a jump, but they are both concerned with consuming souls to guarantee their own power and immortality. And the way the True Knot are formed as a faction in Dr. Sleep, they do have a familial atmosphere. They are a cult, they're a death cult, but they, in their own twisted way, love each other and protect each other, at least until it becomes more appropriate to screw each other over, which is very family-like, I think you'll agree, especially through the lens of Curseborne. And the upcoming, I think it's upcoming, it may actually be out by now, and if it's so, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it, The Life of Chuck, which is another Stephen King novel. But we're not just talking about the movies, because I would say Mike Flanagan's most renowned work to the modern audience is, and I say modern audience, he's been most prolific in the last decade, were his Netflix series, The Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, Midnight Club, and indeed, most recently, The Fall of the House of Usher. I would also like to give special mention to one of his movies, Hush. This is how I was introduced to the work of Mike Flanagan. This really gritty but dynamic home invasion horror slasher movie where the intended victim basically gives as good as she's getting. And so it isn't so much a movie where the prey is just being stalked around an environment. It's where she is trying to find ways to fight back, and so occasionally she has the upper hand, and then on other occasions the killer, our masked killer, is pushing back and he is getting the upper hand. And so they're both using the elements of the house against each other, like cutting the power or shining a light, or indeed essentially using the environment to a really interesting degree, and I loved Hush. I understand it's recently become available for physical release, which I'm very happy about. But yes, back to the TV series. I think when Dixie and I were talking about how Mike Flanagan is such an influence on Curseborne, we were, for the large part, thinking about shows like The Fall of the House of Usher and Midnight Mass. And Hill House, for that matter. The Fall of the House of Usher, I think I mentioned the fact that the very plot of this Poe-inspired series, and I do recommend it, even if you're familiar with the Poe story, you're going to get a lot of new things in here, especially if you're a fan of a lot of Poe's work, because a lot of Poe work appears in this TV series, is a family that is damned by their patriarch's decision. And so they are, all of them, cursed. And they ultimately, it's debatable, do they all deserve it? Do they all end up as they are because of the curse? Or do they end up earning the curse in a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy and therefore their destruction through it? I'm not going to spoil things, as I don't like to do that in these videos. But the idea of a patriarch making a ghastly deal to empower himself, only to basically send that damnation down a generation, is, well, really speaking to us as Curseborne authors and developers. I know, we spoke about the heirs family of the hungry who consume people's hearts. That idea of an almost... it's an almost capitalistic sense of how valuable are your children that the heirs have. Are you going to do me proud, or are you going to bring me shame? And if you're going to bring me shame, well, in that case, I will have your heart and eat it, and I will empower myself, and unfortunately, the sacrifice will need to be yours. I think that The Fall of the House of Usher isn't just a story that massively influenced our work on Curseborne. It's also the visuals of that TV series. There's a lot of dark humour in there too. It's very stylishly written, and I don't mean that in a glib way as if to say they cut corners. I mean it is a wonderful ping-pong match between horror and humour, and it just keeps you going all the way through it. You'll just remain attached to that show. It's very fast, it's very sleek. And I think that again, speaks to the humour of Curseborne. It's something I've not really spoken about in these videos because I like to describe Curseborne as a horror game. And sometimes I think the idea of comedy puts people off. They want their horror grim and gritty. But The Fall of the House of Usher does something very well with its dark humour. Even in the sense of some character deaths in it, there is a poetic irony to several of them that make you laugh while you're reeling from what's on screen. And I know from running Curseborne, but also writing Curseborne, that I've tried to put in some of that satire, some of those cutting barbs about a character's ill fortune and fate. Fall of House of Usher is perfect inspiration for that kind of thing. But that isn't what I wanted to focus on here. I've always been trying to pick on one particular piece of media for each creator that I've been discussing. In the case of Stephen King, I think we spoke about It, even though Needful Things was probably my first inclination. In David Lynch's case, we spoke about Lost Highway. Jordan Peele, we spoke about Nope. Prano Bailey Bond, we spoke about her debut feature, Censor. In this case, I want to speak about Midnight Mass. Now, Midnight Mass is, I guess, what you would consider a slow burn. It's only one series, it's one season of a TV show. Almost all of Mike Flanagan's shows are like this, and by intent. I believe The Midnight Club was intended to last longer than one season, and it's unfortunate that it didn't go on beyond that. But the Hill House, Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, and Fall of the House of Usher are one and done. It's an encapsulated story. You don't have to worry about cancellations or missing anything in the future, which is perfect. And where Midnight Mass is set apart from all the rest of them is it allows you to really slowly immerse yourself in this bath of secrecy. And what do I mean by that really mangled idea, that metaphor? That Midnight Mass introduces you to a community. And it isn't too off-kilter. It isn't like you're being introduced to an Innsmouth group. They're not all cultists, but they are almost all of them religious. They're a small island community off the coast, probably off the east coast of America, northeast, or somewhere off New England, and they are almost all regular, as I say, congregants at the church. They have their traditions. They have their values. They're not all bigoted, although that is often a way of portraying small town values. There are a couple of bigots in there, but for the most part, they are just normal people with normal struggles. But all of them have secrets, and all of them have disappointments, and all of them have tragedies. There's just a piece missing from almost every single person on this island. And then your protagonist gets introduced to the mix, someone who's been off the island for several years, been in prison, and gets to see, I think, the people of the island for how they truly are. Now, that isn't the horror crux of Midnight Mass. The horror crux is what follows when the new priest arrives in town. And now I'm not going to spoil things, because Midnight Mass is one of those shows that's best gone into utterly cold. And what it does incredibly well, maybe my favourite thing about it, is it gives characters the time to breathe, to tell their story, for you to become invested in their fate by just watching and listening and absorbing some just stellar televisual performances. I mean, I put it up there with The Leftovers, and I rank The Leftovers very highly in terms of media presentation of really deep characters who I don't want to see die. I don't want them to have a bad ending. I want them to end up happy. But I also know this is a horror, and certain horrific things have got to happen to make that genre stick. So I'm not going to let you know exactly what happens, but it is religion-based, it is supernatural, and there is blood. Why Midnight Mass? What does Midnight Mass have to offer a Curseborne game? I think more than when I'm talking about the plot of a movie and novel like it, more than the, I guess, tone, or no, not the tone, the theme of a movie like Lost Highway. What I'm looking for in Midnight Mass is tone. What I'm looking for is atmosphere. Because Midnight Mass so eloquently introduces us to this cast of characters to the degree that even though there are lots of them, you don't forget them after the first episode. This is an ensemble, as are many of the Mike Flanagan features and series that I've just spoken about. Often the same troupe of performers and crew come back again and again. I think that's testament to Mike Flanagan. Probably does a very good job. Must be a decent boss if people just keep coming back to work for him. But yeah, you get to introduce your characters slowly. So imagine in Curseborne, your character is freshly reintroduced to a community. It's been some time since they've come back. And so you introduce them first to the family, and then you introduce them to the friend from high school, and then you go further and meet the old teacher who's now long retired and sitting out on the porch shouting at squirrels. And then you go a little further than that. There's the priest. There's the man that runs the biggest business in town. There's the old bully, still there, still doing everything he's always done, pushing himself around and throwing his weight around in the local bar, and so on. You steadily introduce this collage of characters, and that is a really interesting atmosphere piece because it introduces you to community. It makes you feel, both in Midnight Mass and if you do it in Curseborne, as if your character is part of the tapestry but also separate from it. They're like a loose knot because they arrived a little too late or they spent too much time away. You don't have to do this with actual distance. You can actually have this be part of the fact that they are accursed. They feel different. They have become awakened to a new kind of world. And when they return to the old one, everything just feels slightly off. I mean, you can take this to other pieces of media. I know The Hurt Locker is one where you experience, and Jarhead as well, military movies and prison movies do this, where you have a character who becomes so accustomed to their surroundings that they are shell-shocked when they arrive home and don't know how to deal with civilians. But then you start threatening this order that may seem quaint and it may seem backwards, but it is also a safety blanket. You may detest the bully. That high school teacher may have beaten you or held you back in detention more than you were due. But when they are threatened, when your security comes under threat, you are one of the only people with your eyes open to do something about it. That is something I think is an increasingly common presence in Curseborne games I've been running. The idea that you do love these people, these mortals, these humans. You do care for them. You want to protect them, but you can never open their eyes to the true danger. Only you and your crew of fellow accursed can handle it. Now, this may sound like it only suits a one-character game, and to that I would actually say, yeah, if you want to do a solo play Curseborne game where it's one story guide, one player, or hell, if you're just the only player and you want to roll up some of these things to see who appears, this is a fantastic setting. Midnight Mass is a brilliant way of introducing it, especially if a few sessions in, once you've been dealing with more of the mundane secrecy and having to deal with your own curse, a bigger threat gets introduced to the community. And this is what happens in Midnight Mass, of course. When a supernatural threat appears, no one really knows how to deal with it. There are some people trying to appease, some people who are trying to flee, some people who are trying to fight. You can have the same thing in your game of Curseborne, only your character has the ability to actually combat this thing or convince it to turn away. Maybe it's another accursed like you, but further down the road of damnation. Maybe it's something entirely alien. It gives you a weird, I guess, contrasting sense of security and paranoia, because if you're there and your community is slowly turning against you, you care for these people, but they're falling in league with something rotten that isn't just going to hurt you, ultimately it's going to hurt them. Midnight Mass is brilliant for that. Curseborne can easily tell stories like that, and you can easily expand that too to crews, so entire collections of 4 or 5 cursed in one group finding this. Whether it is that they found each other in prison, or whether they have spent so much time in the big city dealing with their family, their accursed family's problems, and now they are coming back home to small town America, and they realize everything isn't quite how they left it. I think those are fantastic inspirations. I absolutely adore Midnight Mass. I think it is one of the best TV shows. As I say, I put it up there with The Leftovers. Not small praise at all. And I would really encourage people to check it out. And do not come to me and say the monologues are boring, because the characters explaining their past, their hopes, their fears in long form, speaking to each other. You know, it's rare that they're going to be just speaking to the camera in shows like this, but they're addressing each other in a completely natural way, in a way that you would allow someone to, were this your environment, your community. It's the kind of soliloquy I really enjoy in RPGs. When a player starts talking and they start really getting into character, and they start talking about what their character fears, what their character wants, that ends up moving me as a story guide, even more than when, certainly more than when there's an action scene, and more than when there's a dialogue. If players give each other space to explain what their characters are doing and why they are doing it, you can end up really getting into some fantastic roleplay. And in a game like Curseborne, where you are having to juggle with a mortal family, potentially a separate accursed family, and then with that your damnation and any obligations that you have next to it, the kind of struggle that is going to be going through your character's mind and for that character's spirit is the kind of thing I would love to see communicated more in these games. It's why in a lot of the games I run for Red Moon Role-Playing, I give characters the chance to have flashbacks, Lost style, I suppose, because it really introduces more to why the characters are doing what they're doing, their motives. Anyway, Mike Flanagan is a wonderful creator, and I strongly recommend you check out his work. I know you're really developing a list now if you're taking everything I've said as a mandate, but please do consider it, especially Midnight Mass, which I was truly very fond of. And you tell me below your favourite piece of Mike Flanagan media, or even better, tell me how you would use your favourite piece of Mike Flanagan media to influence your Curseborne games. Thank you very much for watching.